And welcome back, students. Welcome to our last lesson on loops. We are going to be talking today about for loops. This is a new type of loop which we haven't seen in any kind of really iteration of what we've seen. Like we saw while loops before. We actually talked about while loops. We haven't seen a for loop. So let's actually get into what a for loop is. So when we start talking about for loops, these are typically used when you know the number of loops iterations. However, this is not always true. While loops comparatively are used if we don't know the number of iterations because we can just set it to a value. However, that's not set in stone. All right, if you don't know the number of iterations, you could use a for loop. Same thing like with a while loop. If you know you want to do 5 iterations, like we saw in the one lab, we wanted to start at 0. We wanted to go for 5 iterations. We made it less than 5. Boom, that's 5 iterations. So you can use both loops interchangeably. And because of that, both while and for can do what's known as an iterative loop and a non-iterative loop. Our iterative means that you're like incrementing something every time. Now, we're going to use the variable I when creating our loops, as this is the convention. So let's discuss for loops. Now, a for loop is, again, broken into 3 parts. You have a beginning, which is where the loop starts the initial value. Typically, this is 0, though it might sometimes be 1 or 10 or whatever, depending on if you're incrementing or decrementing. So, for example, int I is equal to 0. That's it. Then we have what's known as the end. So how long for your loop to run? This is where the loop's going to continue until I equals a value or there's some other comparative operation. So I equals 10, or I is less than 5, I is greater than 5, any kind of operation like that. So it's always going to be some kind of like comparative thing. And then lastly, you have the increment or the decrement. Typically, what you'll see, this is either I plus plus, which means to add 1, or it means I minus minus, which means to subtract 1. And after it does the addition subtraction at the end of your loop, it goes through and runs the loop again, checks the conditions to see if it's true, so on and so forth. So let's look at this with an example, which is probably going to be the best way to explain this. So here I have a very basic for loop. And here I have for int I is equal to 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. So when this starts, you'll notice that int I is declared inside the for loop. And the reason why we do that inside the for loop is it keeps it localized to this loop. If I put outside this loop, then changes I make to that variable could affect the loop performance. So that's why I typically will make it localized to this loop. So start with I is 0, then it checks, okay, is I less than 10? Well, we started with 0, so I must be less than 10. So then it's going to go ahead and output that value of I. So it says console right line I, then it does I plus plus, and now it's going to loop back up. All right, I is now 1. So let's check 1 is less than 10. Console that right line 1. Then I plus plus. So now it's 2. It's going to keep doing that up until we get to where I is currently 9. So I is 9. 9 is less than 10. Console right line 9. I plus plus. Now I is 10. And it checks, is I less than 10? No. And you'll notice at this point, it's because it's not less than 10, it's going to exit that loop. It's going to be done. And you notice that's slightly different than what we have to do with the while loop, where we have to either make it so the condition is no longer true, or we have to do like a break statement. If we're doing it, of course, we have something like while n is less than 5, then yes, it's going to do the same thing. And that's what we see here with the for loops. So this part right here in the middle is typically what would be inside of the while. The part here on the end is typically done somewhere also inside of your while. So this is in the parentheses that comes after while. This is inside of your while loop. And this would be typically done before your while loop. You'll declare the variable beforehand. So it kind of condenses it down all nicely for us. All right, let's look at a decrement example. And in here I have I is equal to 10. I has to be greater than 0. I minus minus. So simply for it starts off with 10. Checks C is 10 greater than 0, of course, has to be. So it's going to output 10. Loop back up around after it takes minus minus, which means subtract 1. So now it's 9. Is 9 greater than 0? Yes. Output 9. Minus minus, now 8. It's going to keep doing that up until when we get near 0. So let's go where I is now 1. So 1 is greater than 0. Output 1. I minus minus. I is now equal to 0. And at that point, I get I is now 0. So is 0 greater than 0? No, it's equal to. So it doesn't work, so it exits out. So there's two really quick examples for you. So let's just go ahead and I'm just going to pop over to our code here. Just do a for loop demo quick. So I'm going to do a incremental. So for int I is equal to 0, semicolon, I is less than 10, semicolon, I plus plus. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this slightly different. I'm going to add some console.writeLine statements in here. The value of I before the loop is only thing is there's not really a before loop and after loop, so the value of I should just be during the loop. So you have the value of I during the loop is this, and then the increment, of course, will happen outside of that. So let me just run this demo here quick. Oh, and I think I'm going to get a console.readline in here because it's going to close. Yep. Okay. So you can see here, right here, the value of the loop. So in this is just like the one we had in the notes, and you can see that I starts at 0, and then goes to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I up to 9. But when it hits 10, you notice it doesn't output anymore. Instead, it just exits out of that loop. Right? However, if I were to ask you the number of iterations, you could tell me that there are 10 iterations here, because in this case, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Right? Next, I'm going to do an example of a decrement. So for int, let's do I is equal to 0 again. And you'll notice that it doesn't complain about there already being an int I. And the reason for that is because this int I only exists within this for loop. So I can reuse that variable name. Right? But I'm doing a decrement here, so I want to make that 10. And let's do I is this time greater than 0. And I minus minus. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Value of I during the loop. And of course, I don't need a semicolon there. Okay, let's run this. Okay. And so you'll see that here, this might cause some confusion because I have the exact same things. But 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it counts all the way down, but it doesn't hit 0. I'm just going to add a blank console.writeLine in here just so we can see that those are not part of the same program there of the loop. So let me just reshow that there, and you can see here's a blank line. So here's the first loop, here's the second one. So this one starts at 0, goes to 9. This one starts at 10, goes to 1. Now the last thing I'm going to show you guys today, just really quick, is that you don't have to have necessarily another number in there for the for loop conditions. So for example, for int I equals 0, and let's do where I is less than count. Okay, and it's going to complain about count because I haven't declared what count is. And then let's do I plus plus. So I don't know what count is, so I might actually have to come in here and create an int variable called count. And if I just do that, it's still going to complain because I have to give count an initial value. So if count, let's say, is equal to whether it's a number of person typed in on the keyboard or anything like that. For this purpose, I'm just going to, let's just say, let's make it equal to 5. Just to give you an example. So in your for conditions here, you can actually create this equal to another number. Right? So I'm actually going to do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to have it say console.writeLine. And I'm going to just say have output count times 2. So it's also going to do some multiplication here when I run this. So let's just go ahead and run this one more time. And you can see the value of I during the loop is 0, 10, 1. See, these don't change because we haven't done anything to count during the loop. Right? Even though counts here in the conditions, you can see that only I is the thing that is changing. So if I made this like count times 2 plus I, then the value would change because each time then the loop would be changing in with what it's supposed to be. Wouldn't affect what I is because I is not changing in value, but you can see that this number would indeed change. Right? So there's just some quick demo for you on how a for loop works. So that's going to kind of wrap us up for today, folks. Until the next time.